Ladies and gentlemen, I am the inquiring cameraman. All day I travel around California, the highways and the byways, the downtown districts, the residence districts, the factory districts, all districts. I stop people on the street. I pry into offices and shops and stores and restaurants. I knock on the doors of homes, all for the purpose of digging out voters of California to express their views for your edification. Remember, they're not actors, they're nervous. You'd be scared to death yourself the first time you face the camera and microphone. If they seem awkward, bear with them. I don't rehearse them, I'm impartial. I ask them questions only to help them express themselves more clearly. I thank you. Now for the votes. Votes from carpenters, housewives, jobless men, butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. There's even a crooner hidden in the group, but you'll have to find him out for yourself. All ready for the votes?
Would you mind telling us who your favorite candidate is for governor?
Sinclair.
And what is your principal reason for arriving at that?
Well, it puts a different man with different principles and everything like that into office, see, and it gets away from the old line.
Well, have you made a study of his plan?
Yes, I've studied a little bit. Some of them are rather radical, but I think they'll be modified when he gets into office.
I see. Well, now, listen. Do you really believe that he can end poverty in California?
Well, no, I don't think so, but... well, I don't know what to say about that.
Now, Mr. Warwick, you've made up your mind who you're going to vote for next month, the governor?
Yes, sir.
Do you mind telling us who?
I'm going to vote for Miriam because I want a job. I'm to drive all the capital out of the country. Who's going to pay us?
And you think then that Miriam would be the safest for us all?
Absolutely. There's no time to trade horses in the middle of the stream.
So that was the first 2 minutes of a 5-minute newsreel from 1934, and we're joined by author Greg Mitchell, whose book is The Campaign of the Century, Upton Sinclair's Race for Governor of California, and the Birth of Media Politics. So the announcer said that he was the inquiring cameraman and these were not actors. What can you tell us about what we've just seen?
Okay, well, in 1934, the famous author Upton Sinclair, who had written The Jungle decades before, but then wrote many other muckraking books and novels that made him one of the most famous authors in the world, decided to run for governor of California in the depths of the Depression, switching his party allegiance from socialist to Democrat at a time when FDR was popular. And lo and behold, he inspired one of the greatest mass movements in the history of the country, called End Poverty in California, or EPIC. They published their own newspaper. They got 2 million circulation. They had hundreds of clubs around the state and so forth. And amazingly, he went on to win the Democratic primary in a landslide in August of 1934 and appeared headed for victory. So all the forces arrayed against him, which included Republicans, conservative and moderate Democrats, and others, businessmen, big business, Hollywood certainly, formed together to defeat him at all costs. And of course, my book goes into all this at great length, all the many wild schemes to defeat him. And among them was, and importantly, was Hollywood studios docking their employees 1 day's pay and taking other steps, including most notably MGM under producer Irving Thalberg, creating 3 newsreels that were then shown in theaters at the peak of the campaign. And of course, at that time, newsreels and film in general was tremendously popular, and people went and were tremendously affected by these movie shorts and newsreels that they saw in the movie theaters. And so Thalberg set out to make 3 newsreels that would alter the race, and some would say really doomed Sinclair to defeat.
What What do you see in these newsreels that's a clue to you that they're not what they say they are?
Well, I think as we go along, it'll be pretty obvious. But even if you just want to take the word of Hollywood people and others who viewed them at the time, they would recognize actors from the MGM stable. Not B actors, not well-known actors, portraying some of these people you just saw interviewed with scripts that were written for them. So they're basically reading lines. Some of them are no doubt authentic. Many of them are actors performing a script written for them. And people at the time would howl and just, Sinclair supporters would kind of laugh about it and maybe not realizing the impact these newsreels would have on the average voter, which was indeed considerable. I should just say at the outset here that this was very unusual. I call them the first attack ads on the screen, which then, of course, became a television 25 years, 30 years later. But these were really the first use of the screen to defeat a candidate with what would now be called attack ads.
Well, why don't we watch the rest of the first newsreel and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit more.
Mr. Butler, are you going to vote in the coming election?
I certainly am.
Just who do you wish to vote for, Mr. Butler?
I'm sure that I'm going to vote for Mr. Sinclair.
You must have a good reason for voting for Mr. Sinclair?
Well, Mr. Sinclair have something new, that new epic plan. I think it's time that we should try something new out again.
And you think the epic plan will work?
I don't know, but I'm willing to take a chance on it.
Now, Mr. Skinner, just who are you going to vote for?
I'm going to vote for Marion because I need prosperity.
I've selected Upton Sinclair.
And you probably have some good reason for having selected him. Will you tell us that?
Well, for the first reason, we need a complete rejuvenation of our governmental system, and that's the main reason.
Yes, sir, I do. I think Mr. Merriman is the man, the better man for the governorship than either Mr. Haight or Mr. Sinclair.
I see. On what do you base that, Mr. Poole? Any particular...
Well, I don't believe that due to Mr. Sinclair's socialistic ideas that he should be our governor. And I don't know anything about Mr. Haight.
Would you mind telling us who you selected?
Governor Merriam.
And your outstanding reason for having selected him?
Why, I think it'll be a pity to put a man in as much of a theorist as the other candidates, an untried person in the ways of government.
You believe, then, that Mr. Merriam will keep the boat from rocking?
I do.
And safer for you and your family and all?
Very much so.
Thank you very much. Mr. Duncan,
yes.
Would you mind telling us how you intend to vote for governor next month?
Aye, sure. I'm going to vote for Upton Sinclair.
I see.
And I will tell it to the housetops.
I'm going to vote for Frank Merriam for governor for the reason that he is for democracy rather than socialism. And he won't involve us in any dangerous experiments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Duffy, what's your opinion on this thing?
Why, being in the real estate business, I believe Merriam to be the ideal man, and I'd like to stay in the real estate business, and if Mr. Sinclair gets in, I'm afraid there'll be no real estate business.
Now, Mr. Schroeder, no doubt you're going to vote for governor next month. Would you mind telling us your choice?
I have Upton Sinclair in mind, but his plans are so far ahead of the times that I am doubtful as to whether it would be right for me to vote that way.
Would you mind telling us your choice?
Mr. Haight.
I see. Now, what is your principal idea for having to come to this decision?
I think he has the best judgment of the three.
See, you followed his plans and what he has in mind carefully.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, what are outstanding reasons for your selecting him?
Oh, I've never been very excited about elections before, but Sinclair's attitude towards so many of our institutions that I consider sacred don't quite agree with mine. So I've decided to use all the influence I have to put Governor Merriman back in office.
Thank you, Miss Bryant.
One thing is they're adding lots of background noise, or are they adding lots of background noise? I mean, it seems to me that they're being very sophisticated about the way they've done this.
Yeah, I mean, I think much of it was shot, not on the set. Maybe some of them might have been shot at the MGM lot. It's quite possible that it was, but it was done so well. It was very effective. We do know, I've never seen notes like a paper trail, but we do know from what people said later that the director was Felix Feist Jr., who was a kind of a B director, someone who was looking for his start in movies, young guy, conservative. And actually, in the new movie Mank, which does feature a plot line involving these newsreels, there is a character somewhat older in the movie who basically is playing Felix Feist. He's a junior guy at the studio who sees this as his big chance and ends up regretting it. But there's no evidence that Felix Feist ever regretted it. But and we also know that I was able to track down that the narrator was Carrie Wilson, who was one of the most popular MGM makers of shorts and narrators of shorts at the time.
If the narrator says that these are actual people and he's actually an actor, he's a studio employee, were there any laws at the time that would have said you can't do this? This is lying to the public?
Propaganda, I think you're trying to say. No, there was nothing like this. Was so new. I mean, this was an incredible, this was a fresh concept to use the screen this way, in an election. So no, there wouldn't have been anything like that. I mean, you would have had the usual, maybe the press would have called it out. Eventually, near the very end of the campaign, the New York Times and some others did report that these newsreels seemed kind of fake, and that Sinclair people were kind of rioting at the box office or in the theaters. So there was some of this suspicions raised at the time, but it really wasn't until later when even Thalberg admitted that he made these newsreels. Of course, Irving Thalberg became quite a hallowed figure in Hollywood. They even gave a Thalberg Award at the Oscars every year. But he admitted it. Others talked about it a bit, but these newsreels were, although described as people remembered them, really kind of disappeared into time until I found them that MGM had put them in some archives, and I screened them one day in Los Angeles back around 1991, I believe. So we now have them to show, but they were more described as memories, not that people could actually watch them until very recently.
The candidates, Miriam, Haight, and then Sinclair. Tell us a little bit about them, the other candidates.
Yeah, well, Miriam was the incumbent. He was a conservative Republican, but basically he was described as an ox, a man who was purely a tool of the special interest, an older man, very unexciting, very dull. But he was the incumbent, and he was basically the vehicle for those who opposed Sinclair. I already mentioned Sinclair a bit where he was with his many books and fame, and he was one of the most famous figures in the country, really. Arrested a few times, always making a fuss. The third candidate, I'll just mention briefly, Ray Haight, was he ran as kind of an alternative to the two. He knew that there was, I guess, a gulf between the two candidates, much like today's red-blue, you might say, divide. Haight tried to strike a middle ground. He did get a good number of votes, but he probably took equally from the two candidates. So I kind of dispute what some people will say, well, Haight cost Sinclair the election, but I don't really think that's true.
So let's watch the first 2 minutes of newsreel number 2.
Here we are again, ladies and gentlemen, the inquiring cameraman, and we're going to give ourselves a little pat on the back. Our first issue seems to have aroused all California. We've had lots of comments and suggestions, and we found out that some of the politicians don't like our idea at all. They seem to want you to hear only what they have to say, but we still think you're interested in how the man on the street is actually going to vote. We let him say anything he wants, we encourage him to talk freely, and we're trying to be as nonpartisan as possible. Now for the voters.
I've decided to vote for the present Governor, Marion. Inasmuch as this is my first vote, it means quite a bit to me, and I've given it a good deal of thought and consideration. And I just graduated from school last year, and Sinclair says that our school system is rotten, and I know that this isn't true, and I've been able to find a good position during this depression, and I'd like to be able to keep it.
Mrs. Ashley, will you tell us who you're going to vote for governor, please?
I'm going to vote for Upton Sinclair.
Will you tell us a few of your reasons why?
Well, in the first place, I think he is a splendid, conscientious, capable man and has a program that he can do something for the people that are in distress now. I was born and reared a Democrat, but years later, I became a Republican and then a socialist. And but when Mr. Sinclair declared himself candidate for governor of California, we went in to help in that movement.
Mrs. Ashley was reared a Democrat, then she became a Republican, then a socialist. That seems kind of odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, you've probably noticed a trend in these two newsreels where, by and large, the more upstanding, respectable looking and sounding people are all for Miriam. Where people who are a little dodgy, remember the guy who had only a few teeth and called him Uptown St. Clair. They contrasted black, one after another, black, more working class, two people in a car, and then a more prosperous looking black man in a vest who was for Miriam. So this went on constantly, where there was just enough of a veneer where they occasionally gave a Sinclair supporter who was respectable a bit of time, but by and large, it was overwhelmingly the good people of California were for Frank Marion.
One of the issues that keeps coming up over and over again is socialism, which is still with us today. In the 2020 campaign, that word came up a lot.
Right.
Why was that such an issue for people who don't know in 1934?
Yeah. Well, of course, FDR was already being accused of being a socialist. Well, socialism was, was in the news all the time. It, of course, had come to the world and to America in the recent decades. Upton Sinclair was known as one of the world's most famous socialists, proudly. And basically, it was somewhat better to be called a socialist than a communist, but it was tainted as it is today, I suppose, with claims that socialists are just communists in nicer clothes, and that was certainly rampant then. So socialism was was a code word for dangerous, radical, anti-American, pro-communist, and so forth. So it was quite a tag. So you'll see in these interviews that whenever they can slip in the word socialism, either by a Miriam supporter or Sinclair supporter, they're going to try to do it.
Let's watch the rest of newsreel number 2.
Yes, I've decided to vote for the present governor, Frank Merriam.
Would you give us a reason why?
Yes, I will. In the first place, I don't think Mr. Merriam has been given an opportunity to prove what he can do for our state. In the second place, I don't wish to see Upton Sinclair elected governor. I personally have a position that I value. I've worked hard. It's a small firm. It's an independent firm. I don't wish the businessman, my employer, to be forced to do things he doesn't like and in turn force them upon us. And instead of being somebody in the firm, will just be an individual, probably with a number. I don't wish to go to work every day, just to work for food, for necessities of life, and that's all that's in it. I have other ambitions. I want to work hard. I'm looking forward to a future, a happy future, one which I personally can make for myself without being told what to do by other people.
My choice for governor is Mr. Haight. Will you tell us why? I want Mr. Haight in the governor's chair because Mr. Haight is progressive. Mr. Haight is young. He has new ideas, and I don't want Mr. Sinclair in the governor's chair. I have a little business here that I've worked many years to build up, hard, day and night. and I don't want the state to come in and take it away.
I'm going to vote for Upton St. Clair.
Will you tell us why?
Upton St. Clair is the author of the Russian government, and it's worked out very well there, and I think it should do here.
Thank you.
I'm going to vote for Mr. Haight.
Will you give us a few reasons why?
One of the reasons why I'm voting for Mr. Haight is because I'm not going to vote for Mr. Sinclair because he's a little too radical. Mr. Merriam hasn't done a thing for us fellows who are out on the tramp. We can't help because we're on the tramp, and I'm going to vote for Mr. Haight because he's evidently in the middle ground. So, thanks.
Governor Merriam.
Have you any reasons why?
Yes. I feel that Sinclair is too radical. I'm born and raised in America. I feel that Mr. Marion is the only man in the field today that can beat Sinclair.
You may ask me questions. I will answer.
Mr. Branson, have you decided who you're going to vote for?
Yes, sir, for Upton Sinclair.
Have you any reasons why?
Why? Because I believe he's the best man for the job. I've always been a socialist, and I believe he will do the best for the people, for the working, especially for the working people, and even for the rich.
Thank you.
First of all, I am American, and I believe Mr. Marion will support all the principles America has stood for in the past 150 years. I have a job now, and I want to keep it. I get paid in money and not scrip. I am a married man. My wife and I love California, and we'd like to stay here. In case we should leave, why, I would like to at least have a couple dollars and not scrip.
Yes, I'm going to vote for Mr. Upton Sinclair
Would you tell us a few reasons why, please?
because I believe in his policies. I've come from New York, and everything has gone very badly since I've been out here. And I've heard his talks over the radio, and I believe that he will give us a good deal.
All right, now, Mr. Gilgun, have you decided who you're going to vote for
Yes,
governor?
yes, sir.
Who?
Mr. Sinclair.
Dr. Griffith, have you decided who you're going to
Raymond
vote
L. Haight.
for? All right. Have you gentlemen any reasons?
My reason for voting for Mr. Sinclair is, first of all, our Democratic Party is staying with him. I am a Democrat, and I do not want to change my politics. I believe that the Republican Party so far has been a failure in the last 10 or 12 years.
Have you anything to say to that, Dr. Griffith?
You're wrong, because the Democratic Party is not with Sinclair, because the Democratic Party is not raising funds for Sinclair's election. The money raised in different states is independent of the Democratic Party, and you know that.
Shall I say some more? Sinclair interviewed our... Sinclair has interviewed our President of the United States, and has got a great reception.
And when he went to see him, he told him not to discuss politics because he knew that he would be put on the spot by Sinclair. And that's the ultimate object of Mr. Sinclair, is to put Mr. Roosevelt on the spot by the election of governor.
There's no such a thing as putting a man on the spot. That's the thoughts of your own mind.
We're on the spot now.
No, you're not. You're wrong, Dr. Griffith. I disagree with you on that. I disagree with you.
All right, proceed.
Our Senator McAdoo is also with Sinclair.
Senator McAdoo has billboarded the whole town and said that the epic plan is a failure. That's the words of Senator McAdoo.
Where did you get that, or when?
On Central Avenue billboard, I've seen it this morning. You can see it for yourself.
I think that's a mistake, Doctor. I think that's a mistake.
And by the way, lots of you don't know that it doesn't matter how you registered, Republican or Democrat. You can cast your vote on November 6th for any man or any party you want to.
What are your thoughts about that debate that was at the end of number 2?
Well, again, it seemed like it was going to be even at the start, and then it became loaded. It was important for the gentleman on the left to raise FDR, who Sinclair was continually saying actually privately supported him. In fact, Sinclair went to Hyde Park, met with Roosevelt. Roosevelt was very friendly. This was just after Sinclair had won the primary as a Democrat. And there seemed to be all indications that FDR would come out for Sinclair. As I show in my book in good detail, FDR was then convinced to not endorse Sinclair. And in the end, the very end, he actually privately work to help Miriam. It's quite a kind of a shocking episode for most people who read it, but it was important to raise that issue of FDR and kind of debunk it in that newsreel. Senator McAdoo is mentioned at the end, very famous figure at the time, California senator, again, had seemed to embrace Sinclair early on and then distance himself from him. So again, it was important to point this out to the audience and to also to make sure Democrats were told they could vote Republican. They should go out if they want and vote Republican if they wanted to.
In your book, you write that the EPIC plan, End Poverty in California, was influential later for New Deal programs. Why would FDR be opposed to Sinclair?
Well, this was still early in the New Deal, really. Roosevelt had gotten some dramatic things through, many others he did not. And it was uncertain what the future would be. And there was a rising tide of candidates on the left across the country. And FDR wanted to seem like he was not in their camp whenever he had a chance. His wife, Eleanor, was a little more friendly towards Sinclair and lefty candidates. So Roosevelt was very wary of this, but he, on the other hand, he was very sympathetic with much of what Sinclair was promoting. And this End Poverty plan, which is much too long to go into here, but it was largely based on giving people a living wage. It was based on more of a communal work system where people on the farms would provide food for people working in the factories, and people in the factories would provide household goods and everything for people working on the farms, kind of a barter system, and an age-old pension. And so that was just one of the things that FDR took advantage of, the sentiment for that, which led to Social Security and various work programs around the country, putting people to work, not just letting them stay on the unemployment rolls. So in the end, the EPIC plan was widely influential. Although Sinclair was too hot a candidate to gain that kind of mainstream support.
There's one more newsreel, but before we look at number 3, so after number 2, I'm not sure exactly when it came out, but what was the status?
Yeah, October. It was about, number 2 came out about 2 weeks before the election, and then the one you were going to see now came out in the final week, and so had a tremendous impact. And was, they couldn't, like I said, there were starting to be some reports in the few news outlets that were sympathetic to Sinclair started to see some reports of the fakery and so forth. But it came so late that this final one was kind of the nail in the coffin. And I think probably I should introduce it by explaining what it came from, which is that Sinclair had made a crack early on, a joke that if he was elected, half the unemployed in the country would come to California to take advantage of his EPIC plan. And this was then seized on by his opposition as if this was a serious statement. And so the rest of the campaign, they just continually, in billboards and millions of advertising leaflets and this massive campaign, which, I call my book The Campaign of the Century because it wasn't just the newsreels. There was numerous innovations in this campaign that then laid the groundwork for what we would call the modern political campaign, hiring outside political consultants to take over a campaign instead of using the party hacks that had always been used, raising money nationally, promoting much of the campaign as basically an advertising campaign with fake radio programs and advertising and leaflets and so forth. You can go right down the line how this campaign inspired the birth of the modern political campaign. And these newsreels, as I said earlier, were really the first attack ads, and they really jumped on this notion of the unemployed coming to California to ruin everybody's lives.
The University of South Carolina sent me a copy of the 3rd newsreel, so we'll show that now.
Ladies and gentlemen, your inquiring cameraman decided to look into this much-discussed situation of the unemployed of the United States flocking to California. Let's see what we can see in actual scenes.
Mr. Healy, would you tell us what you know about this situation?
Well, I'm employed in Colton Yard as a Southern Pacific switchman. It's been my observation that every freight train coming into Colton has from 50 to 150 or 200 transients on them.
What kind of fellows are these men?
Well, it's been my observation that they're men of all classes. Only last week I pointed out to the chief of police and two of the police officers of Colton, two men who were wanted in Yuma for burglary.
Constable Williams, will you tell us a little about that place across the street?
Yes, sir. That's the government and quarantine station. Every car that comes west in California is stopped at that station and inspected.
I see. Well, how has the traffic been lately?
Quite an increase of traffic.
I see. Do they give any reason for coming in here at this time?
Yes, they say that they read in the papers that California is going to be cleared of poverty and everybody gets things for nothing.
I see. Thank you very much, Mr. Constable Williams. Judge Jones, would you tell us a little about this situation?
Well, I've lived in Ireland 9 years. This situation is far beyond anything I've experienced. Since last August, when conditions had begun to improve, this hobo condition has gradually grown worse.
How many men would you say a day came through here?
Approximately from 100 to 150 on each freight train.
What type of men are these folks?
From what experience I've had with them as a judge, I consider most of them radical ideas, some communists.
Well, in other words, you wouldn't call them desirable citizens, would you?
If they stay in California, I don't know what will happen to the working man.
Thank you very much.
Captain Bevan, in your capacity of State Registrar of Motor Vehicles, do you find the number of people coming into California as great as represented?
The influx has almost tripled. In fact, there are approximately 100,000 increase over last year at present and almost doubling daily.
Do you speak from your personal knowledge, Captain?
I speak from the records of the State Department of Motor Vehicles.
Thank you very much.
Because of the tremendous importance to you Californians of this influx of visitors, your inquiring cameraman went even as far away from California's borders as Phoenix, Arizona. We went to Phoenix because of a statement made in the local papers of Florence Warner, Federal Relief Administrator for the state of Arizona. She said that more than 36,000 unemployed passed through Arizona en route to California during the past month. She declared the situation has become serious for Arizona, necessitating the feeding of an additional 1,000 persons a day at the federal transient camp. Your inquiring cameraman interviewed, 30 stated that they were on their way to California to spend the winter and to remain there permanently if the epic plan went into effect. They ride the roofs, they ride the boxcars, the gondolas, not the kind of gondolas you float the canals of Venice in, but these boys don't seem to care because they're California bound. We went to Colton, to Doggett, to Yermo, and we explored both sides of the border at Yuma. Watch them. They'll hide their faces when they see the camera. Nyland is an important junction point. Our passengers have to change trains frequently to avoid the roundups made of them. When they're not riding on the trains, most of them live in jungles. A jungle is a hobo camp. And now we're going to give you a real inside view, an actual interview in a genuine hobo jungle. Look at them and listen to them and think.
You fellas come a long way?
Yeah.
Well, Tyler.
Greenville, Texas.
Texas.
Pennsylvania.
Seymour, Texas.
New Jersey.
New York.
What are you doing out here, bud?
That's my business, partner.
How about you?
We have special invitation out here for the climate.
What about you, son?
I'm just writing.
How about you, mister?
I have a friend who's going to get on with a job. I know I'm going to get a job. The USC needs a quarterback.
How about you?
Forced to be here.
Just a ride. What about you?
Chuck's pretty good out here. Well, what's he going to tell?
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
So that one stopped sort of abruptly, but one of them said that USC needed a quarterback.
Yeah, that's that probably was not scripted. But yeah, even a couple of those fell. The basic point of that was just to show here's a hobo jungle, and there's hundreds of thousands of others coming in like this. But even a couple of those fellas said, "I hear I'm going to get a job. I hear I'm going to get a job, or I know I'm going to get a job." So, again, the idea was the images and just this threat. It almost didn't matter what they said. It was enough to just to show them. And some of those scenes were taken from MGM movies, which had scenes of people riding on the rails and things like that.
So what is the epilogue as far as the race? We haven't really said yet, but what was the outcome? How close was it?
Well, it was, Sinclair lost by a couple 100,000 votes. It wasn't that close in the end. As I mentioned earlier, Ray Haight got more than that number of votes, but I think the votes were pretty much split. I think it would have been closer without Haight in the race, but I don't think Sinclair would have won. There was such a tide against him. So many Democrats ended up voting against him. And what you have to remember is that at that time, or until that time, California was a rigidly Republican state. They never had elected a Democratic governor. FDR was starting to change that, but it was going to be a tough haul for any Democrat in California. But this was a turning point, because after this race in 1934, the party, what we now know as the Liberal Democratic Party of California, took root and actually elected one of the epic candidates in 1934. Colbert Olson became the first Democratic governor elected 4 years later. Numerous other epic candidates, such as Augustus Hawkins, who went on to serve in Congress for decades, and in Hollywood. Much of the book really focuses on Hollywood, and this was a turning point for Hollywood. Again, the so-called liberal Hollywood that we know today had its roots in this campaign, because the screenwriters and the actors who had just formed their guilds were so outraged by the tactics in this campaign that it gave a real boost to their union efforts. And from that point on, Hollywood really started shifting from being extremely conservative or even right-wing to the liberal Hollywood that people love and hate today.
When you watch these newsreels and think about recent campaigns or 2020, what goes through your mind? How does it link then to now?
Well, I mentioned earlier, of course, the great divide, the red-blue divide, which was certainly evident here. I guess the divide in fake news. I don't think this was not the origin of fake news. This was not the origin of dirty campaign tricks, which go back in our entire history. But it was the use of the screen and use of other media techniques and advertising that was found to have an incredible influence. And so they actually identified that voters and average people could be misled by misinformation, propaganda, putting out lies that could not be corrected, taking advantage of people's prejudices or susceptibility to propaganda. And certainly we've seen that in recent years today. So I think there's so much in this campaign that resonates today. And so I'm happy to, catch people up with that.
The book is called The Campaign of the Century, Upton Sinclair's Race for Governor of California and the Birth of Media Politics. And our guest has been Greg Mitchell. Thank you for taking the time.
Happy to do this.
Well, I don't believe that due to Mr. Sinclair's socialistic ideas that he should be our governor. And I don't know anything about Mr. Haight.
Would you mind telling us who you selected?
Governor Merriam.
And your outstanding reason for having selected him?
Why, I think it'll be a pity to put a man in as much of a theorist as the other candidate.